All right, man. And we are live.
Hey Munj, how's it going?
Good, good. It's great to have you, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to know, a bit more about your podcast. I'm really glad you've started this, and I think I'd love to see more of it and where it progresses from here.
Definitely, man. Yeah, I kind of came up with the idea. I've been considering doing this for a while. Um, and I think this is just the start of 2023. Like I'm just putting myself back out there and just I don't know, I think I got a little comfortable and during the bull market. And now I'm just kind of putting myself back out there, being uncomfortable, set a bunch of goals for the year. Been doing cold plunges in the Pacific Ocean as well. So pretty much, yeah, my goal for this is to highlight you, right? I think I best express myself through audio, right? I'm not the biggest writer, but in person is kind of when I light up. So this is kind of the best version of that I can consider. And part of the reason that oh yeah, I guess I'm also expanding my coaching business as well, as I mentioned to you. That's kind of a tangential piece that at some point will come into the picture, but for now, I just want to like find ways to put myself out there and connect with people. And so I was thinking this would probably be more of like a personal podcast, like a personal life type podcast of who Sid is and kind of what I tend to meet very interesting people. And you're definitely one of the most interesting people I've met. Kind of, I know age doesn't matter, but there is a decade that separates us, me being 10 years older. And you just have this like wisdom to you that is it's like amazing. I totally consider it amazing. So just to kick it off, I remember for people that don't know, Sid Sid has been to both my weddings to the same person. One was in India, one was in the US. So we are very close. And I remember at one point we were just sitting in a cafe and you casually just mentioned, I think I was getting a little bit down from the bear market. And you just mentioned this quote about how what is the scarcest commodity? Isn't that what you said in life? And most people always say time, time, time. But what was your response to that?
I said it's mind space. Like at any given point, time of course is a scarce commodity, but in any given instant of time, what you dedicate your mind space to, like if your attention was a pie chart, how much of it you dedicate to what, that at that given instant is kind of like a very valuable commodity. And usually it's always scarce for when you're looking for, more of it for the things you need it for. So that's why I said, value mind space more.
Yeah, that definitely caught my attention because I'd never heard that before, and now I totally use that all the time because people always think time is the most valuable or scarce commodity. So how do you manage your time space or mind
I
space, excuse me?
mean, mind space, it's actually an interesting thing because, for things that occupy mind space, there's kind of two parameters to it. One is urgency and the other is importance. So there could be some things that are highly important but not as urgent, and there could be some things that are highly urgent but not as important. So how I kind of think about tasks and how it arranges in my mind space is more or less sort of like a function of this, where it's like if you had importance and urgency on a chart. In the first quadrant is everything that's important and urgent. That's obviously at the top of kind of the priority. And then I look at, okay, this is more urgent, but probably less important. So this should go next. And then it's like, try to make it um, what's less urgent, but highly important. And then what's also not urgent and not important. So I mean, at best, I try to achieve that, or I feel like naturally that's just how kind of mind space aligns itself when I think about whatever I'm going about.
Definitely, man. Um, how do you manage your personal life with that in terms of like family can make things very important oftentimes without it being super urgent. So I'm just trying to think of how to manage that, how to juggle the personal life and the professional life at the same time. Um, and I would add in because you studied in the West, right? Uh, it that plays an interesting perspective in it, right? Because you also were trained a little bit at one of the best universities in North America. Tell people where you went, kind of what you studied as well.
Oh yeah, I studied my undergrad at McGill University. It's in Montreal, Canada, and I did my undergrad in economics and finance.
Cool. Yeah, the Harvard of Canada, right? That's what they say. Or as you once said, Harvard is the McGill of the US.
America, yeah.
America. Yeah, so the reason I bring that up is Indians in general, we have this culture of not being able to say no, or it's almost like shamed upon, or boundaries is just like a lot of living at home, a lot of yeah, there's a lot of cultural differences, right? From the collectivist to the individualistic perspectives. So how do you kind of manage saying no? Is that something you had to learn on your own? Do you did you learn anything in the West that you brought back to your culture team in India? Just kind of how that played a part as well.
Sure. I always kind of feel like in terms of just the work life itself, I feel like the West operates on quite a few different principles from what we operate or what we're seen, operating in the East when I worked. So I certainly feel like what I learned more from the West. I mean, in many ways, I kind of see them as counterbalancing forces.
Hmm.
A lot of times, the way Indian organizations or Indian teams tend to operate is very on your feet, dealing with problems on the fly. Of course, you have a plan, but then there's so many things that you have to kind of be agile and react to just because your situation is kind of just throwing challenges your way. And I feel like that's something we do well as Indians, where we adjust to situations on at the time, and we have more flexibility or fluidity or agility to kind of adapt to these things.
Hmm.
Uh, but maybe the kind of what we miss out in that process is being able to achieve things in more efficient time, perhaps because we're spending more of our effort, tackling with all these little things that come our way. Whereas if you look at the way, or at least in my, personal subjective kind of experience, I've seen that the West is very, very organized in the way they kind of approach work. So there's huge emphasis given on planning, and then it's almost like you spend a huge chunk of your mind space on planning something, and as long as you make sure your plan is good, then even if you spend 10% or 20% of your remaining mind space on just executing it, it's going to be a good plan, and you often end up doing it faster. Of course, the downside of this system is that you're very dependent on the plan, and if there is a new situation that's thrown at you mid plan, you're not as agile or as flexible to kind of adjust to this new challenge or this new condition that's kind of popped up. So I guess my learning is to kind of find a mid path in between these approaches. On the one side, you have very solid planning that you go out there with, and you make sure you do it as per plan, and get the fruits that you're supposed to. But of course, at the other end is have that agility and flexibility to kind of adapt to different changing conditions and things that get thrown at you as challenges.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like I guess in the West we'd refer to that as like a wartime CEO versus like a uh peacetime CEO. And like India, that's a great way of explaining it. In India, CEOs oftentimes are operating from a wartime CEO where it's almost like all hands on deck. You never know kind of what's going to be thrown your direction, both from an internal or external request, and you're just ready to go, right? But in those moments, it is very difficult to plan. right? And strategize a little bit more longer term, and vice versa. I think in the West, uh, people can be a little bit more rigid to plans as well, and less fluid, as you mentioned. So when things don't go right, um, it it can take a little more energy to change plans and change things on the fly. And so yeah, that's a really good way of explaining it. I'm almost trying to figure out what is like what's the purpose for my podcast, as you mentioned earlier, right? I was kind of judging myself for not giving a good enough of a response, but I think it's after I got my master's in psychology, right? That's what I did during the last bear market in 2018. I find these cultural nuances to be like very, very interesting, right? Um, and because I meet so many interesting people, like one of my cousins, Snehal, shout out to him. He mentioned, he was like, dude, you should write like a newsletter or like something about just what you do on a day-to-day basis. Like I would read that. And more about the people that I meet, the experiences that I'm able to open up to. And you think about it, right? Like living the crypto lifestyle, like it's it's pretty privileged and amazing to people who are doing like a 9 to 5, because we're able to like travel all over the world. And it's kind of funny. It's almost like the same group of people. Sure, it grows. But going to different conferences, and it's like even Mo, right? So Mo Yuk is a great example of this. So I don't know how much he loves using his name, but whatever. We met in India, right? In 2018, um, when I was out pitching Akash to the world, and helping him with business development and introducing them to investors. And I ended up meeting Moyuk in India, in where was it, in Goa, right? We met in Goa and ended up really connecting then. And I was kind of, because I was being frugal, helping fundraise, I was trying to minimize costs too. So I just kind of ended up crashing in his hotel room too. And that's, it's a great way to get close. Um, and we lived down the street from each other. We lived like, I don't know, like 5 blocks away in San Francisco, but we met in India, in Goa. We never would have met in San Francisco. So it's just like, it's amazing the communities that we meet, the places that we go, the experiences that we have. And I guess maybe part of this, the goal for this podcast is to explain those cultural nuances of crypto, of what it's like trying to do business in the West from an Eastern mindset, Eastern perspective. And also just kind of getting more in-depth understanding of kind of what the entrepreneur's journey is, right? Those are the three kind of Venn diagrams that I think are my passions as well. And so, yeah, just kind of bringing people that have that alignment, and just talking about the things that we do. I think we're so lucky. Like just imagine people that have kids, their mind space, like it's completely eaten up. Like once you enter into family mode, maybe yes, there are some advantages in the East of being able to get help, but in general, that's kind of being like a great example for the West of being like a wartime CEO, where you just wake up, like you have certain things you need to do. You need to like feed the kids, take care of them, drop them off wherever they have to go once they get old enough. And it's kind of hard to plan, right? It's kind of hard to like uh, go out that much and kind of have your own life. And so like, yeah, like we are probably, also being young is great. And so we're in like the 1% of the world in a way, from that perspective, right? Of just having the ability to navigate and move through the world like that in a fluid way. So maybe a good place to start would be, how many countries or uh conferences have you been to, just say in the last like year?
Oh, in the last year, conferences, let me see, I guess starts with Feb was when there was ETH Denver. March was ETH Dubai, or somewhere around March or April. Then there was the conference in Goa. Then there was Austin, where we were there for Consensus and Deep Central. After that, I think I did Masari Mainnet, and then
New York.
Cosmoverse in Medellin.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, and ETH Bangalore.
ETH Bangalore.
Yeah. So
Which was that was just
December.
yeah, okay. In December, right after my wedding. Which do you think was the most, like, say for someone who's entering into the crypto space, right? And they can only attend like one event. Like, yeah, I'm gonna take time off from work and I'm gonna go check out this crypto thing. Where would you recommend would be like the first out of all the ones that you attended last year would be like the best intro or inviting area where people could meet more people?
Personally, my favorite is actually ETH Denver. It was kind of the first ETH Denver conference that I'd been to. I had been to just one other conference before that, but I've been to a few since that, and I still feel like the general atmosphere, around most of the main kind of conference venue itself, when you roam around inside, is it's actually just really just builders around that are walking around, taking an interest in what other people are building, sharing what they're building, and it's kind of like very vibrant conversations. And like for me, my experience, I didn't feel like I needed to be a part of any conversation. If I'd just be, let's say, at a particular spot waiting for something to happen, or checking my phone, uh, the average chatter that I overhear on either sides is something that I'm either reading about right now myself, or something that I've wanted to look into for the last few weeks, or something that is just a new word to me and I really want to learn more about. So it kind of feels like an information overload at one point, when you just get that many kind of stimuli at a single point, where people talk about different things, different words that come up. So in many ways, it was also kind of an exposure to the depth of this space. Like for me, sitting in my own kind of room or in my office, getting to the depths of doing what I'm doing, I never truly realize where the space is at as a whole. At least when it comes to the builders that make up this whole space. But when you go to a conference, you hear about what people are building themselves, how passionate they are about what they do, and how much they've themselves put into what they're building, and how much they've thought it through. It all kind of reflects, and when you kind of take the aggregate of all of that stimulus that you receive in a conference like this, is when you realize um, the true depth of the space as a whole. So that was a great exposure, and I think it's for anyone who comes new to the space. Some conference like ETH Denver, which has a lot of historical kind of relevance as well. I think it was one of the first ETH conferences that was held. So ETH Denver always has that importance, and I think that's one of those places that I would highly recommend.
That's both super exciting since it's coming up
Right.
end of next month, right? Dude,
Yeah.
and super sad because I just signed up to do this cold immersion training in Poland, where I'm gonna climb Mount Śnieżka for like 2 to 3 hours in like snowy weather in my shorts. So I've been doing like cold exposure, taking cold showers, jumping into the ocean. So this makes me want to reconsider that, but it's one of those things I'm just doing for like
Yeah.
to maintain discipline. Like last night, at like 2:30, I was like being a tired child, refusing to go to bed. I took a nap on the couch, I think, and then I woke up, saw the video from Alex Seifert, of him taking a cold plunge, and I was like, all right, I got to do this. So I do you know the exact dates for it?
No, I myself won't make it this year, unfortunately.
Oh,
So
okay, cool.
I haven't seen the dates.
That makes me feel better. That definitely makes me feel better. Cool. So, what are you most excited about for 2023?
Honestly, I think it's gonna be I mean, and there's a lot to look forward to, in terms of my own building process and what we're doing at Comdex. But kind of at a broad level, it's an interesting point in our journey as a space, as a industry, when I think about it. I mean, kind of thinking at a crypto level, of course, the huge events we saw in the last year, it has left a scar on a lot of the people who probably came in the space in that time. Of course, a lot of them would have made a whole lot of money being exposed to so many different things that did well, but it took one UST, one FTX, or 1 Celsius to kill trust in the matter of like overnight. And for a space that's kind of ironically, not ironically, I mean a space that kind of markets itself as the home of the trustless economies, having lost the trust of retail is kind of really damaging the position that we're at right now. So what I feel like is exciting, or worth looking forward to this year is, of course, one is a collective question that needs to be answered is how does how does kind of crypto become relevant again? How do we get back in that positive momentum and truly onboard a much larger set of users? That's a sticky user base. So what I mean by sticky user base is one that doesn't easily kind of disappear when the markets are in a downturn. Currently, what's happening is proving that even at the peak, whatever majority of the use case that came into the market right now were folks who were speculative and wouldn't stick around when things weren't as good, and that's what we're seeing now. So how do we build that next wave of sticky usership? That's kind of one of the questions that I want to see answered in the year. And a lot of times the answer to these questions isn't kind of like something you deduce down by logic. It's more serendipitous, where you kind of just go out there and things tend to happen and you stumble into the right answer. But I think that's one of the bigger things that I kind of think about. And then myself, a lot of my focus within Web3 is just purely DeFi. So I think more in terms of DeFi, but I also feel, a lot of the primitives of DeFi that we are kind of used to, or that we can imagine using, is all pretty much built right now. So it's more a question of what really is next in terms of innovation and in terms of something new and exciting that comes in that space. Of course, existing implementations of things are very exciting within themselves because they differentiate from each other in little ways, and those are each kind of an interesting experiment to see how things will turn out. But at a broader level, I feel like what we now need as an industry is that one killer product that stands out as a product on the merits of being a product. You as a user are not using this product because you're getting token incentives, or you're going to get free tokens or like an airdrop or a free NFT. You want to use the product for how good it is. That's when you'll be able to attract mass users to it. And then so I always kind of say the end user wouldn't really realize at what point the utility they're using actually uses a blockchain at the back end. And that's how good the product needs to be, is that you use the product and then you kind of realize it's on a blockchain. So how do we as an industry get there is kind of the question I think about as well.
I think what makes this extra hard for you as well is you've had a little bit of controversy thrown your way as well in the past. When did it get the worst? Mid last year, end of last year?
Yeah, somewhere around mid last year was when
last year, right? So so what do you say to people who label you as another Indian scam project? Because I mean, it probably got to the point that you looked in the mirror wondering yourself, like, am I that Indian scammer? Like, and just because I know you're such a thoughtful guy, but you also do maintain a balanced perspective. How do you, like, mentally in your mind space, right, protect your mind space from that and continue building in the Cosmos ecosystem, which in itself can be a tumultuous ecosystem to build in? So in addition, it's almost like this all bad things come in threes, maybe. And in addition to that, having the fact that we're in a bear market, right? So all three of these combined, what, I'm not even sure what I'm asking here, but how do you stay motivated? How do you stay focused? How do you protect your mind space?
I mean, when I think about it, there's kind of two aspects to it. One is, of course, to take feedback from what's being said. A lot of times when people want to communicate what they say, it's the message mixed in with a whole bunch of personal baggage of emotions and
Mm,
things associated with what you want to say. So at the receiving end, it's about being able to filter down what's come my way and extract from it what's constructive feedback that I can use to build on and then kind of move on with that. But in terms of the building part of it as well, when I look at Cosmos ecosystem, of course, there's one of the great things about the ecosystem is that things reach that point because people are passionate and ideological, and
mm,
they're willing to kind of stand their ground, fight passionately, hold to their ideologies and defend it in the public forum, which is what ends up leading to conflict a lot of times, and conflict combined with emotion can kind of create uh, more reaction and more noise than is expected. So in that regard, when I kind of choose where my mental mind space should be allocated towards, of course there's the broader community that we access to through Twitter, through Telegram, and that's kind of our primary point of contact to understand what the community wants from us as a project and what we should do better to cater to them. So in that regard, I do feel like a lot of it can boil down to better communication lines between us as a project and the community, which is something I think on an ongoing basis, we want to continue building on. But I think what really motivated me throughout that period was, I think soon after, everything happened, our testnets went live, was when I was either in,
when was this?
so that's what I'm trying to place it. I think around October when I was in New York for the mainnet conference, and I think I soon went after to Medellin as well.
Mm,
So when I was in Medellin, I met so many different people from Cosmos ecosystem as a whole. The beauty of being in a Cosmos conference versus not being in a Cosmos conference is a lot of times you don't have to give a lot of context of who you are or what you're building, or you don't have to explain Cosmos to people. You kind of just say, "Hey, look, I'm building this." And because it's relatively still a smaller ecosystem, people tend to know or associate projects easily. So I was in an environment where, okay, there's a whole bunch of other people who are building, exciting things in the Cosmos ecosystem. I go out there, introduce myself as, someone who's building Comdex, and immediately the conversation immediately goes towards, what are you guys building? How does it work? What's the benefit of it? And then every time people kind of came to a realization of what we're really building, how those individual pieces align with each other and what the kind of broad vision is, I always felt like there's a huge amount of excitement that I kind of received from everyone I spoke to about what was being built. And that was kind of feedback coming from, very credible builders, folks who have already done it before, been successful at it, and kind of delivered a lot of value to the ecosystem as a whole. So that was very motivating to have, these respected folks be able to kind of see the merit in the
like
work. And
motivating and therapeutic, I'd imagine, all at the same time after like, just
yeah,
hearing constant FUD spewed your way.
exactly. So it's more like the words of one reputed builder who's got a great track record of building. Positive words of one such person kind of outweigh
Hmm.
the voices of like 20 or 30 people who haven't actually seen the code, who wouldn't bother going to GitHub and seeing what the dev activity is. They just go to the coin gecko, they see the charts and they're like, hey, why price not go up? So it's kind of like trying to balance your attention between these two voices.
Yeah, I hear you. How do you think the product stands now with respect to where you were a year ago? Because you delayed the launch of the product. And what was the main reason behind the delay of the launch? Well,
So I mean,
first of all, even before I get into that, I should say congratulations because you launched. Is it mainnet that you've launched already?
yeah, mainnet
Great.
for all three products.
Cool. For 3 product lines you've released. Okay, and that it's as of what? When did that happen? When was the release?
The last product that we released was just like a few weeks ago. So I don't know when this will be out, but in early Jan is when we released Komodo.
Cool.
Harbor and CSwap are already live for more than a month at that point.
Nice, nice. And so how much was the product delayed by in release from when you were hoping to release it to when all three product lines were released?
So it kind of ties back to I'll take it back to when the chain started, to kind of set context to everything. So when we started off, it was obviously with the vision of kind of reimagining commodity economies the way they operate on the principles they operate, but recreating that on the kind of decentralized realm of things. And the first kind of point of link that we saw was through having synthetic commodity assets. And in terms of kind of painting a picture of something in parallel for those who would already be familiar, like Mirror Protocol and Terra was a good example of what synthetic assets were. So we had something very similar in mind where we let users speculate on commodity assets, which are synthetic on the platform, and then they kind of exchange them on an AMM to move their exposure across different assets and kind of enter a digital arena of price exposure and leverage on synthetic assets of real world commodities and whatnot.
This was the vision when? What year?
End of 2021.
End of 2020. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And we launched the chain. We focused on building the modules that were necessary. But when you kind of just evaluate, synthetics or Mirror Protocol, the kind of product that it is, at a very fundamental level of what it is, it has pretty much every primitive that is required in most of DeFi built into a product like that. So the ability to accept an asset as a collateral requires you to be able to read the price of that asset from external markets. When it sits as a collateral, the ability to either issue a debt against it in the form of an existing token or a new token, managing the parameters of that debt itself on the protocol. If it's a collateral, it has to be liquidated at some point, and how that liquidation happens. So building, let's say, an auction market for the liquidation or any other kind of implementation for it. Each of these are set of logics that we're very used to in kind of the transactional financial systems that we're dealing with now. But to code all of this logic back into an application, we realized that, hey, look, all of this code is going to be useful for things beyond just synthetics. And this was all happening, mind you, in tremendously bullish market conditions for crypto as a whole. So DeFi across the board was pumping. A lot of the tokens in the ecosystem were pumping at this point. So there was a lot of liquidity that was just flowing into the ecosystem. So liquidity never became like a primary consideration when it came to thinking about challenges of building this product as it is. Post, I think maybe Jan or Feb was when we had our DevNet live. So a month or two after that, markets started taking pretty tremendous dips downwards. And that's when we started to realize that, hey, look, liquidity might eventually become a challenge for us. And how does this model survive in crunch liquidity conditions? And that's when we started to see that, okay, there's probably going to be more that needs to be worked into this model for it to survive in low liquidity. And, as is the case with any kind of derivative asset or synthetic assets, the way these assets maintain their price peg with the original underlying asset is ultimately the strength of the asset itself. So we realized that, hey, look, firstly, there needs to be a good arbitrage mechanism or a good pegging mechanism to ensure that these synthetics maintain price parity well. And secondly, it's also about being able to build sufficient liquidity in order to be able to do that. So realizing both these challenges, we address the first part where, okay, liquidity probably requires a whole rethink on the model itself. But on the arbitrage, when you have the ability to move in and out of a stable coin, you're able to kind of arbitrage better. So we then thought, ultimately, a stable coin is also a synthetic asset in itself. It's just always pegged to the price of one. So we thought, okay, we have the primitives built in on the chain to already have the exchange where, ultimately synthetic assets could also be exchanged, and to also issue a stablecoin synthetic. So that is itself the beginning point of kind of any DeFi economy. But then you, of course, build money markets, then you build, like derivatives, perps, and that's how you kind of build a broader DeFi economy. So in kind of having built all of this, we realized that, hey, look, we've already got the building blocks in place to build a DeFi economy, which ultimately synthetics can be a part of. But the broader economy kind of answers to a lot more than just what the synthetics app was built for. So that's how we kind of gotten on to realizing that maybe this needs to be spun out as 3 individual apps that perform their own functions and are designed to perform their own functions as a money market, as a DEX, as a stablecoin protocol. And that's when we kind of took the call to, proactively turn this into a 3-product DeFi economy rather than a single product focused chain, so that the chain also proves itself as as having utility in the DeFi world where people can actually use the chain to build products of their own. And, of course, when it comes to building DeFi,
If you were to describe the 3 product lines, the 3 products via analogies to what's out there right now or what's most popular, how would you describe the 3 of them?
So Harbor Protocol is the equivalent of, I'd say, MakerDAO.
Okay.
So Harbor itself is like MKR, which is the token that's used for governance and accrues value from the system. DAI is CMST, which is the stablecoin. Then we have Komodo, which is a lending borrowing.
So Harbor's a mechanism to create your stable coin.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, Harbor is the protocol or the application where the stablecoin can be issued or minted.
Minted is the word I was looking for. Yeah, nice. Okay.
Then we have Komodo, which is the lending borrowing market, very similar to as a product to what you have in the form of Aave, where people can deposit their crypto assets on lending yield or borrow and earn and pay a borrowing yield. Of course, the mechanism itself is different, but it kind of serves the same function to draw parallels. And then we have CSwap, which is again to draw parallel like Uniswap in the Ethereum ecosystem. And then we have Comdex chain itself, which would be the equivalent of Ethereum in this same analogy. So Comdex is the Ethereum, and these are the kind of applications that are on the chain.
And how were you able to solve or hoping to solve the liquidity issue via having these 3 products?
Having these 3 products doesn't, I wouldn't say it fully solves the liquidity issue, because liquidity issue would exist within these products as well, where we need liquidity to flow into any DeFi product for it to be successful and actually deliver a good experience for users as well. So how we address to solve it, or how we kind of approach to solve it, one part of it can of course be bootstrapping incentives, providing token incentives, which is kind of the tried and tested model we've seen across all of Web3 until now. And in my opinion, yes, it's tried and tested for the reason that it has worked in the past, where it has been able to draw users. But the challenge is always going to be to draw sticky usership, which is the kind of usership that comes and sticks despite decreasing APYs or decreasing reward structures, because they truly want to use the product for what it is, and they believe that they have no better alternative in that particular product segment that they're dealing with. So for me, I think the challenge is not so much trying to create the liquidity myself. Of course, that's one part of what I want to do. The other part of it is how to enhance the overall stickiness of the products that are built. So to ensure that the users that come to the products, now probably all of them don't have a great time using it, because there'd be a lot of different errors or bugs that can pop up at different times, which is more a job of refinement that needs to happen. But that requires.
I refer to it as almost being in an alpha phase or beta phase.
Yeah.
Been launched, but now you're getting kind of live data in production to refine it, right? So which is also kind of why you haven't opened the incentives yet either. So
Yeah,
it's at a fair point in its product development, I would say.
correct. And to our our own kind of effort is to open up that process as well, where soon we'll be just announcing kind of a bounty program where anytime there's a bug that users encounter, if they're able to report it to us well enough in time, we'll actually just reward them or incentivize them for finding that bug. So it then incentivizes users to continue using the app as well. But in the long run, the way these users would want to stick around is if the app itself becomes a great app to use, which is what our focus will be. And then markets are all kind of like a sine curve of reaction. So liquidity is it's probably on its down right now, but it has to come up at some point. And when it comes up, we want to be at least in a position where our products are able to retain users they attract.
How did you choose I love the look of it, right? I think there's this purple and white, I think purple and blue backgrounds. How did you guys end up choosing that color scheme?
There's too many brains that went into figuring that out. I mean, for the most part, a lot of the branding work itself is down to the guys in the design team, I think, who've been taking charge of that. But beyond that, when it comes to the decision making on the way the logo should look or the color schemes, typically the process we follow is, there's a set of options that we just post in the team chat, and then people kind of have a poll where they all vote on their top choices. And then if there is, close enough competition between choices, the ones who chose kind of try to justify their decision, why they chose that way. And then of course the one with the more solid logic is chosen by everyone in the team and then move forward with. So that's usually the process we tend to follow when it comes to, choosing at least things like the name, the logo, the color scheme. So it kind of makes everyone feel motivated to work on the same thing.
That's cool. I like that. Let's see. Would you ever consider posting those as polls live on Twitter or something for like, hey, which do you like better, this or this? This is one of the things. This is one of the things that, like, one of my recommendations has been to you in the past, right? Of like kind of figuring out a way, because to answer my own question from earlier, it took about a year to do, I guess you could say, Comdex's relaunch, if for lack of a better word or phrase to describe that. And I think partly what took so long was the fact that you guys had, it took a long time to be audited for each 3 platforms or products to be audited, right? So given that, I give you a lot of credit. And I was listening to, for a random note, I was listening to the CEO of Disney refer to movies, right? He said that how he gives a lot of creative leeway to the directors who are creating their Disney movies, and how what was the specific line? It was something along the lines of, oh yeah, everyone always remembers if a movie was shitty, but no one really ever remembers if the movie had a delayed release, right? So I think it's important that you took the time to make sure that, try to prevent yourself from having as many hacks and attack vectors as possible. That's kind of what led to to almost having a year delayed release of the product for the perception of an outsider, I guess. So that was one of my recommendations, long story short, of trying to find ways to get the community more engaged. And I know it's this fine line, right, between like centralization of decision making and decentralization of decision making, because the more cooks you get in the kitchen, everyone isn't always the best cook. So or have the most insight. So how do you kind of manage that balance of communication with the external world, or with the Twitter world, whatever you call it, versus kind of internal decision making?
So on an internal level, I think, over time, folks in the team have kind of identified their roles pretty well and filled in the shoes for their roles pretty well. So a lot of times when it's really broad decisions, it's kind of team wide, because, everyone has to kind of get involved and at least have some say. And rarely does it happen when such a poll is sent out at a very broad level that there's too much disagreement. Usually it gravitates towards 1 or 2 choices, and then people kind of narrow it down from there. It's, I think, more a principle of, I think, again, headspace, where I feel like when it comes to certain decisions, a decision on, let's say one aspect of, let's say, what emoji should be used at the end of a particular tweet, should not occupy mind space in the mind of a person who has, little understanding of that job, or little kind of to do with it on a day-to-day. So such a decision typically should not be democratized so much, where it's kind of slowing down the decision itself, because so many people need to have their say heard on it and to kind of get that in. So one example that I find very interesting is, and I don't know if this is true in the US, but I've seen this a lot in India, is a lot of times when you go to the restaurant as a family or as a group, let's say, 5 or 6 people, the restaurant always puts down fewer menus on the table that you're seated at, then there are a number of people at your table. So if there's like 6 people at the table, he's mostly going to put down 4 or 5 menus. And the reason behind that is they know that when there's fewer menus, the dominant decision makers of the group end up taking that responsibility of acquiring a menu first so that they can start making decisions themselves. And they know that the lazier decision makers would just hold the menu, read through it, but not really reach a decision too quick and kind of waste time. So their hope is that by giving fewer menus, the alignment or the arrangement of the menus kind of eliminates the non-productive decision-making contributors and end up in the hands of the productive decision makers who kind of speed through the decisions quickly. And that leads to a faster resolution of that table's order than if it was democratic for all 6 of them to make their own choice.
It's funny you say that. So we, I don't know if I told you, but end of last year, me and Russia have been like throwing more like networking events at home in San Francisco, kind of trying to rebuild the crypto community here, which, you know, I think it's become very concentrated. So there's still a lot of great talent here. It's just become less pervasive, right? The community as a whole. So long story short, one of our passions is in almost building that bridge, right, between India's ecosystem and the Bay Area's ecosystem. And we went to, it's very hard to do that though, right? Like, how do you arrange marriage, you know, like the deepest Jeet from India with, I don't know, like your typical Midwest boy in America, right? Like you put them in the same room. There's a lot to try to learn and understand and build trust amongst each other, right? But food tends to bring everyone together. So, for example, we ended up going after an event, after a Builders Tribe event, we ended up going to get Indian food afterwards, right? And I'm gonna, yeah, whatever. I'll just be candid about this. It was really funny. So we ended up walking like 3 blocks and to go get Indian food at Chat Corner. And Rachna, my wife, she just took complete charge, right? She's like, guys, let's go get Indian food right now. This is kind of her thing. It's a way of like, you know, culturally immersing people into our food, into our culture. So we enter the restaurant and there's like probably about I'd say 12 people there, right? One of the guys there, he manages money for a lot of like NBA athletes and stuff, or like US athletes. So he's this like giant black guy, right? Like huge dude, 6'5", 6'4". He's like, yo, like, where's the meat? Right? Like I need to have meat. And even before I entered the restaurant, he was like palpably tentative about going in, right? Where he was like, like I've never been here before, like I never had this food before, you know, like it was just a brand new world, right? Which you can imagine is kind of the effect that most people would have the second they like land in India if it's their first time, right? There's so much stimuli everywhere. And another guy wasn't even sure, just standing around outside, like wondering what to do, because I think Rachna may have walked behind. The second she got there, she walked in, they gave everyone menus there, right? So people had no idea what to order. And Rachna was like, me, Rachna, and Pareen just decided, like, all right, let's get this. Like, here's what we're going to order. And we did. The second we ordered it, they loved the food. Rachna was almost like handing the food to everyone, you know, doing the whole like collectivist thing. And that really helped open people's mind up, right? To be like, oh, okay, maybe India isn't as scary, as difficult to understand. And food kind of does have this way to bring people together as well. So it's just like, I'm constantly amazed at the ways that, you know, me having been raised in the US, I always looked, it took me a long time to embrace my culture, right? Like I always look into the mirror, being raised in Boston, thinking I don't look white enough like everyone else around me, right? So I've been completely amazed with how Rachna, my wife, she was raised in India, right? So her identity was formed in India. But she's passionate about, and she's passionate about her identity, right? Naturally. So I'm amazed at oftentimes when how much she's taught me about embracing our own culture, and how oftentimes maybe I've just been, call it like trauma in a way, of like being raised, seeing other people around me uncomfortable, and me not having a strong enough roots to stand on, right? To support the Indian culture and explain like, oh, no, this is how the West, here in the West, we think about it, but here's an alternate way to think about it in from India. And there's no like right or wrong. There's no better way of thinking about it. I think I might even just done that. So there is no right or wrong way of considering different cultures. And it's a really beautiful way that when we share like more, and this is the whole thing about being about open source, right? I think this is something that your team could also benefit from hearing, is that actually Vanan, this is another great example. Vanan, who runs a lot of your infrastructure, right? He was here at the time, and we went out to dinner. It was me, Greg, Osuri from Akash, Rachna, and a number of guys in the Cosmos ecosystem, right? And Italian, European guys actually, and our Indian crew. I think we had three Indian guys there, right, straight from India, and they were silent there the entire dinner. They were just quiet, right? Maybe there's like this dynamic of like being uncomfortable or not speaking to your elders, because there were like some ballers there, right? Even like Saga's CTO was there, right? And even to the point that I give the Europeans a lot of credit. One of them at one point was like, I find it really hard to connect with Indians. I don't know why. I've just never been able to connect with them. And the table just remained silent, type of thing. And then finally, I pointed that out to Vanan, that I was like, hey, Vanan, like, I don't know, I think I asked Vanan, I pushed him a little bit. It's my thing. I like pushed him to talk a little bit. And then I had the European guy and him kind of communicate a little bit, to be like, he asked him straight up, like, I told Vanan, hey, do you know that like this is the perception that it's kind of hard for Indians to communicate with Indians? And he was like, what? No way. He's like, we're super open though. If you have any questions, you should always just ask us. Like, you don't have to worry about that. And I appreciated the fact that he spoke up. And I was like, yeah, man, but you also can talk, like we don't have that dynamic of, what is it about that? How would you describe why sometimes at a table, if it can feel uncomfortable, or even just how it works in India, right? Is it a hierarchical thing? Is it like a fear of speaking amongst the white men?
Um, Honestly, I don't know how much of it can be attributed to an India thing. I think it's a person to person thing, because I've met some tremendous extroverts in my time in India who have little to no exposure of, things outside of India. But I've seen their interactions with non-Indians, and they've been super vocal, super, excited and interested to learn about something new that they probably never knew. Whereas at the same time, I've seen very highly exposed, intelligent people who've spent good amount of time living in the West and being acquainted to the West, but being introverted themselves, aren't so comfortable, being the ones to spark up conversations in situations. It could be one of these, or, could be one of those situations where you sit at a table, you feel like you're surrounded by folks who you perceive to be in either in some way, ahead of you in terms of more wisdom, more knowledge, more money, more achievements, more success, just any kind of perceived superiority. You kind of feel like, okay, I need to be very careful about the words I say now. I have a limited audition window, if you want to say, where I need to impress these folks around me, and only then is how I build a good image for myself. So it could be like a combination of different factors that leads people to be this way. Um, I find it kind of hard to think of it as an Indian thing, because I'm Indian myself, and I feel like I've seen plenty of like super, like I would say, too extroverted people, where sometimes you probably wish they were less extroverted in the way they behaved. Uh,
Definitely.
yeah, so it's a mix.
I do think of that as more of the outliers though, of like, and that's the thing that's annoying, right? Where like oftentimes the guys who are quiet are the ones who have the most to say. That's why when they're just sitting there not saying anything, that's why it kind of bothers me, because like those are the guys with the most insight to share, and once they do open their mouth, you're like, oh well, okay, that's why you're waiting so long to talk. you know um do you have any like in like fun insights about when you first came to Canada for your undergrad, of like welcome to Canada moments?
Um, I feel like Canada, I mean, university is a very different context from like moving to a place and working there and kind of living the life there. So in the context of university, I felt like there wasn't much of a gap or kind of like a transition period. I took off from India, I landed in Canada, but I was surrounded by a bunch of students who, whether or not they were from Canada themselves, were still in a foreign environment, in a foreign place, and trying to make their own kind of ground in whatever place they reached at. So that was a great unifying kind of factor in amongst all of us, where even if I was relatively more foreign to that particular situation than someone else, we're all moved out of our homes, come to a new place, and living to learn together. So that was, I would say, as a student, it was a lot of fun. There was a lot fewer things to stress about and worry about in life, and it kind of just was about focused on what's the best time we can have, what's the best chug time on this beer that you can have, and things like that. But when it kind of got to working and like living life here, I realized how different it is, and in many ways how privileged we are to have certain things on either sides of the coin. Like when I think about my life in India and Bangalore, it's so easy where just like it's kind of like a privilege thing, and I know for the West, to hear an Indian say this probably sounds very weird, because they're like, what's this obsession
I
with
love it.
this?
No, this is what I like saying. Say
It's like
provocative things.
I love that in India you could just live and you can realistically afford having a house help, having a driver, having things delivered to you, having someone come cook your food for you and go back, so that you can actually focus on the things that you really want to, and those things are relatively taken care of, and it's something that people can afford more easily in India than they could,
How
let's
much
say,
how much does it cost? How much does on average it cost to have a driver and a cook?
uh, less than $20,000 a year.
Hmm. Both or each?
Way less, actually.
Yeah, way less. Way less.
Way less. You
For
could do
for
that
each.
in. You could actually do all of that in like 5K a year, honestly.
5K for both a cleaner and a driver?
Yeah, easily.
Yeah, that sounds right.
If my math is right, yeah, you
Yeah,
should
I
be
mean,
able.
how much do they make on average, like a cleaner?
I mean, when I was in Bangalore, the person who I had who came to clean my house was like 4,000 rupees a month, which
4,000
is,
rupees, which is what, divided by 80? Was that
yeah, like,
$50? Did I get that right?
yeah, like 50.
50. Yeah, so $50 a month. Yeah, man. So 50 times 12 is $600 for a cleaner. And
Yeah.
do they come in like once every 2 weeks, like in the US?
So this was just for me who came like once a day.
Once a
There are
day.
people, yeah, there are people who have them stay the whole day
Yeah,
every day.
yeah.
Uh, there's people who have them come once a day, people who have them come twice a day. Uh, so in that's kind of one thing I like about India, is that things are accessible. If I'm at home, I'm cooking, like literally I'm mid cooking, and I realize, oh shit, I don't have this one ingredient. I just open up an app, I order it, and chances are, if you're in a city like Bangalore, in under 10 minutes, that thing is actually going to be at your doorstep. So your whole process isn't disrupted. You just kind of go on with life, and things are very smooth, very simple, very straightforward. And I kind of value that, because when you live in an environment like that, of course, it's very, very privileged. I fully acknowledge how much privilege comes with the fact that, I'm able to afford these things. I'm able to kind of have access to these things. So I'm cognizant of that, but I also feel like that's one of the bigger benefits, where it frees up your mind space to focus on things that you really want to. Whereas when you kind of live in the West, there's other things that free up your mind space, and this is kind of a good comparison is, uh, let's say you're a family in Canada, you don't need to think about how much money you're going to spend on your kids education because, the state covers that for you.
Mm,
You're not going to worry about your financial planning to make sure you have enough money for your old age in case something happens to you healthcare wise, because they're like, hey, look, the government healthcare also takes care of you and the government pension pays for everything.
mm.
So with that few things to worry about, you kind of truly then focus on, living your life and living a good life. So that's what I value, or I feel, in terms of when it comes to life in the West, those are some of the things you get access to, and that's the privilege of living in the West. But of course, it comes at a cost of you got to do your own dishes, you got to, clean the snow out of the driveway yourself, you got to throw the trash out yourself, and do all these, do your own laundry and everything. So it's just a trade-off that way, at least in my kind of limited perspective of what I've seen.
That's very true. And Rachna, like I tend to adapt to my environments very quickly. So when I come back from India, I'm like for the first week or maybe couple weeks, takes me a lot of time to like get the engine started again, go back and do the dishes daily, do the laundry, do all this stuff. There's all this additional amount of like work that's needed. And it's funny because from a European or American perspective, it's like, yeah, that's just life, like grow up,
Yeah.
go be a young man and manage your responsibilities. Whereas in India, like we get almost coddled, or we're like lucky that
Yeah.
that we have all that kind of done for us, and we have this amazing food that's just can be cooked for us as well. Uh yeah, it is this like amazing comparison, right, between both.
You know what's funny? During the 2020 lockdown, like the first ever lockdown, people were like stuck at home picking up new hobbies and like talking about, hey, I've picked up this new hobby, I've learned this new thing. The most interesting thing was in India, like the majority of the country didn't have access to their house help or their cooks at that time because no one was going out to work, right?
Right,
So a
right,
lot of
right.
these people who have always had shit done for them in their life were suddenly doing these things like, hey, I clean my, and it's like a new hobby for them. They're like, hey, you know what, mom? I picked up a new hobby. I've started cooking. Where it's like, no, you kind of need to do that to survive, but you're calling it a hobby because, okay,
Yeah.
that's something new you do in your life that you weren't doing before. So I kind of saw this thing where it's like, okay, everyone's picking up new hobbies. Someone's learning cooking, someone's learning cleaning, someone's learning laundry and things like that. What are the people who did this anyways doing now? Like, if you anyways were
Mm,
those people who did your own dishes, anyways did laundry yourself, what's a new hobby for you? Because for the people who never had hobbies, these things became hobbies.
yeah,
So the question was, what are those people doing? So
yeah,
that
man.
was a funny tidbit from the Indian perspective, where you're just used to having things fed to you, served to you all the time. And then you're like, where did all of that go? I'm gonna have to do all of that for myself now because it's locked down.
Yeah, man. That is a great analogy. I think in the US, everyone picked up baking bread. Like for the longest time, you couldn't find yeast anywhere because everyone was just baking their own bread. And it's just like that was funny. Um, from a personal standpoint, what would you say your goals are for this year? For example, like I set this goal that I need to get in motion of learning 100 songs on guitar. And right now I can barely play like chords from one song. So like I have a lot of work to pick up
Yeah.
there, pick up
Yeah.
steam, yeah, in hobbies wise. But it's important to have balance, right? So maybe this is me pulling out my coaching hat here of like, I know work is the main focus, right? But what's like have you come up with any fun personal goals for the year as well?
Personally, I think I kind of, at least what I've learned in the past 2 or 3 years is that a year itself has started to seem like a very long time now, where I feel like I can't fully plan for a year when, things can change so quickly over months,
Mm.
and I have to readapt and change your plans. So I just
For,
feel
for, for
like,
what for what it's worth, so I
yeah,
went through a planning session with my like Bay Area mastermind group a couple of days ago, which has put me on a totally like, this is what's gotten me motivated, right? To do so much. And the way that we're just envisioning this is like, what's the goal that I want to be at by end of year right now, like starting today? Obviously, it might change. Maybe we'll reevaluate on a quarterly basis. And then how would I know a month from today whether I'm on the right path to achieving those goals, right? So it is kind of just a fun goal that you have in mind. I mean, there's no pressure necessarily to achieve it in case things change, right? So it's a fluid goal is the way I would think of it. But it's also just nice to have like some type of North Star, right? Of like, okay, here's something I would love to do that I haven't done yet. And it's nice once you put it out there, then somehow you just conjure it if you know if it's what you want. So like, keep it I'd say keep it light and fluid, but just any personal goals, something that you haven't been able to do but wish you could have, or some skill or something you'd like to acquire, whatever.
Yeah, I think from a personal goal perspective, something that I've been thinking about, even before kind of this year started itself, was with everything that I've done until now in my building journey as a builder, I've kind of recognized that a lot of the building has been learning, collecting information from all the existing things, trying to create my own hypotheses about what the best thing is, and then building that out. I think this year, for me personally, I want to get more into the innovation side of things, where we're no longer building things that already exist, but we're truly building something that's not existed. Innovation could be in the form of a wholly new product, a wholly new mechanism, or just a whole new UX or a UI on an existing product, which is something that excites people, brings more eyes our way, or just kind of truly creates value in what it's built for. I think that's the realm I want to get into more now, because I feel like with the launches, it's freed up more mind space, it's freed up more time, it's freed up more intent at my end, energy at my end, and not just individually for myself. I think I wish this collectively for a team, for the team that we have, because within the team, we've seen over the past few years, past few months, a lot of folks pick up a huge amount of responsibility and kind of recognize within themselves the ability to deliver on certain things, almost in a linear fashion, where they say, this is what I'm going to achieve and I'm going to go for it. And then they kind of just reach there. So I feel like with all this potential there, this collective mind that we have as a team, should be now, will now kind of enter that thought process of coming out with, of building things that are out of the ordinary, that out of what already exists. And that's more of a kind of a personal goal for myself, is also to put myself in that thinking mode more and deliver more on that side of things.
Yeah, like tapping into your creative, innovative side as well, because I really love that, because India also often gets labeled as creating like Me Too products of everything, right? And not being able to innovate and create things on their own. And it's almost like a chicken and the egg problem, right? Like how is innovation going to be more acceptable, more digestible, more less likely, like more easily used, right, on a day-to-day basis, and kind of challenging the status quo. How is, I don't know how we're doing time wise, because I know you said let's just check here. We have about 5 minutes. Just
Yeah,
curious, how is that evolving right now in India, right? Instead of kind of being labeled as like only creating Me Too type products. And also I should name that part of the reason that the West has the privilege and the ability to do this is we don't live at home with our families, right? Like the joint family situation isn't there. So it's easier to kind of broaden our perspectives, meet different people, increase the collision factor from that regard, and the power of the dollar, right? As you mentioned earlier, in India, you can hire a maid or a cook for $50 a month, and they come every day, right? So that's part of the benefit of living there, but also there isn't as much almost expendable resources, right, to be able to innovate and take big leaps and potentially fail hard, right? So how is India's perception and pulse for innovation, for failure, for creativity, for growth, failing forward, all of those kind of perspectives?
I think I have kind of like a long answer to this and a short answer. I'll just try to keep it short, combining. So I kind of feel like a big part of why India fell into that trap of being labeled as the place that has just Me Too innovations, has a lot to do with kind of when you take a few steps back and just kind of look at the incentive system that's aligned towards innovation. when you kind of look at the West, if you're someone who's operating in a field of innovation where you're truly building something that's that's going to be novel, that's going to be new, that you believe could be unique as a product in the market, you're able to have easier access to kind of intellectual property protection, and that kind of encourages you to truly go on your own path of finding these innovative journeys for creation. Whereas in India, a lot of times we've seen that those systems haven't really worked as well as they should have. And I'll just give a personal example where my dad comes from an industry where he worked in a European company that manufactured genetically modified seeds, agricultural seeds, and crop protection medicines and chemicals and whatnot. So a lot of times what would happen is they would have a product that they spend billions of dollars in R&D on because it's a German company or a European company, based in Europe somewhere, under the best of European standards and practices. When they come out with this new, product that they release in the market, as soon as it's out in the market, an Indian competitor was able to obtain that, synthesize it in the lab, figure out how easy it is to make that thing for, this 1/10 the cost, and then not have any of the R&D premium priced into the product. So they would undercut the price of the European product all the time, which ultimately kind of becomes a challenge for the European companies because they've spent these billions of dollars in R&D to produce this product, and here's a competitor who's just copied it and kind of launched it out there. So in regard, because of a system like that, India kind of never got heavily into that cycle of innovating and creating new systems because it wasn't really incentivized. But that being said, I think today India is very different. When you look at UPI technology, I think, which is probably the most impressive example of adoption story that I've seen in recent times. You could go to Bangalore now, people could purchase something like a chai, which is literally this small. It's like a shot glass of chai, which is 10 rupees, which is like, an eighth of a dollar. And you could pay for that electronically to the guy who's receiving it electronically. And until a few years ago, you could go to stores. And when I say few years, this was like 4 or 5 years ago in my parents' locality in Mumbai. If I go to a shop and bought something worth 150 rupees, the guy wouldn't take card or digital payment from me because he had a minimum of 200, where I have to pay at least 200 to pay digitally. Versus now I'm able to pay 10 rupees or 8 rupees, with digital payments. So I think the tech savviness, the openness to adoption has increased a lot more now in the new kind of wave of things that's going on in India. And because people are able to see the value in this technology and able to, realize that value themselves. So I think it's changed tremendously more recently.
Yeah, that blew my mind. Like I like what? I could just use my phone and scan a QR code and send like 8 rupees. Like it is. I think the US even sent people to study India's government for how you were able to release UBI from like a UPI to what, billions of people, right? In just about a year or two, I think is like how fast it launched, which is really amazing. So that's good. I mean, I'm happy that the climate's changing, and I know we're kind of running out of time here, so maybe would you be down to have a chat like this again sometime in the future, just to see how you're doing and continue this conversation about teaching Indian culture to the West, and also just picking up on anything we have to share as well.
Oh, for sure. I think this was a very fun conversation. So I'd love to do this sometime again. Hopefully sometime when I'm in the US, and we can kind of probably do one in person where we record in person as well. I think that would be super fun.
Yeah,
But yeah, then I'd love to still, continue this chat again. I think it was fun. And yeah, super excited for the channel or the series of what it ends up being called, because I'd love to see who else you bring to the channel. I know from whatever I've interacted with you in the past, I know that you have a very diverse network of people you're connected to in different walks of life who achieved a lot in those different walks that they've been in. But I think it's a great diverse mix, and I'd love to see what we see more in the future.
For sure, man. Me too. I'm also excited about it. Like sometimes I'm afraid to set long-term goals because I don't know, it's just it's not how my brain is programmed. But when I went through that session a couple of days ago, it was just like, man, in a way, it was so relieving, right? To like, it's almost me being my own version of an entrepreneur, I guess, of setting goals, which I don't do very easily. It's almost like pulling my teeth out. But once I have them, then it just motivated me, to like move forward, do things. And there's so many people that I meet. I get so much energy from the people that I talk to and the conversations that I have, that this is a great way for me to like maintain my network as well, and introduce them to the world, right? So yeah, that's my goal. I hope it can't be explained what this podcast is in a box, and if it is, then this was a success.
Awesome.
Cool, man. Thanks again. Thanks for joining and being the first. You'll always be the first of this podcast series. So and I wouldn't have done it with anyone else. So thanks, man.
Awesome. That's an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure, man. Take care. See ya.